I remember the exact moment I realized my entire life was built on lies. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way, except that it would become the day that split my existence into before and after. I was standing in my kitchen in our beautiful 4-bedroom house in Cheshire, the one Danny and I had spent 2 years renovating, the one where I thought we would raise our children, grow old together, build a lifetime of memories. I was making dinner, something simple, a chicken stir-fry because Danny had been complaining about wanting to eat healthier, and my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. No words, just a photograph. And in that photograph, my husband of 7 years had his arms wrapped around my younger sister, and they were kissing in a way that left absolutely no room for innocent explanation. The background was unmistakable, the bedroom of the holiday cottage we owned in the Lake District, the one Danny told me he'd been visiting alone for work meetings with northern clients. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at that image while the chicken burned in the pan. The smoke alarm eventually screamed me back to reality, and I moved through the motions of turning off the burner, opening a window, fanning the alarm into silence. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Something had broken, yes, but something else had awakened too. Something cold and patient and utterly determined. Let me tell you how I got here, and more importantly, let me tell you what I did next. Because this isn't a story about a woman who crumbled when she discovered her husband and sister's betrayal. This is a story about how I dismantled 2 people who thought they could destroy me and walk away unscathed. This is the story of how I uncovered secrets so dark, so damaging, that by the time I was finished, they had lost everything they'd ever valued. And I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my entire future. Growing up, Charlie was always the special one. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, though it took years of therapy and a fair amount of expensive wine to reach that point. It was simply a fact of our household, as immutable as the color of the sky or the way our mother's roast potatoes were always slightly burnt on the bottom. Charlotte was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born with those enormous blue eyes and that infectious giggle, she occupied the center of our family's universe. Our parents, Margaret and Robert Hartwell, were good people in many ways. They worked hard, they provided for us, they never raised a hand or a voice in genuine anger. But they were also absolutely, completely, helplessly besotted with their younger daughter. Charlie could do no wrong. When she failed her exams, it was because the teachers didn't understand her creative spirit. When she crashed our mother's car at 17, it was because the roads were poorly maintained. When she dropped out of university after 1 semester, it was because formal education simply couldn't contain her potential. I, meanwhile, was Rebecca. Reliable Rebecca. Responsible Rebecca. The one who got straight A's and made it to university and graduated with honors and got a sensible job with a sensible pension and never caused a moment's worry. I was praised, certainly, but always with that slight undertone of expectation, as if my achievements were simply the minimum requirement, while Charlie's mere existence was a gift to be celebrated. I learned early to shrink myself, to take up less space, to find satisfaction in being useful rather than admired. I became an accountant because it suited my methodical mind and my desire to find order in chaos. I was good at it too, eventually becoming a senior financial analyst for a major retail corporation. But at family gatherings, no one asked about my work. They asked about Charlie's latest Instagram post, her newest boyfriend, her vague plans for world domination through influencer marketing. And I accepted all of this. I loved my sister despite her flaws, or perhaps because of them. She was vibrant and funny, and could light up any room she entered. She had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the world when she focused her attention on you, and I craved those moments of connection, even as I recognized they were rationed out strategically. I told myself that sisters should support each other, that jealousy was an ugly emotion, that her success didn't diminish my own. I told myself so many lies. Danny came into my life when I was 26. I was at a work conference in Manchester, bored and contemplating an early escape to my hotel room, when this incredibly handsome man, with dark curly hair and a smile that seemed designed specifically to disarm, walked up to the bar and ordered a drink. We started talking, and within 20 minutes I was laughing harder than I had in years. He was in property development, he told me, buying rundown buildings and transforming them into something beautiful. He loved architecture and history and the satisfaction of creating something lasting. He was also, I would learn much later, an expert at identifying vulnerability and exploiting it. But that night, and for many nights after, I saw only the charm, felt only the intoxicating rush of being seen, being chosen, being wanted. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. A romantic weekend in Paris, a ring that must have cost several months' salary, the whole restaurant applauding as I said yes through tears of joy. My parents were thrilled. A real estate developer. How successful, how impressive. Even Charlie seemed genuinely happy for me, hugging me tight at the engagement party and whispering that she couldn't wait to be my maid of honor. The wedding was beautiful. The marriage, I thought, was happy. Danny worked long hours, but so did I, and we carved out time for weekend trips and dinner dates and lazy Sunday mornings in bed. We talked about children, about moving to a bigger house, about all the dreams that couples are supposed to share. He was attentive and affectionate and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that I refused to acknowledge at the time. The way his mood could shift without warning, sunny one moment and cold the next. The subtle criticisms wrapped in concern, the suggestions that I might want to wear something different, do my hair another way, lose a few pounds, the credit card bills that never quite added up, the business trips that seemed to multiply as the years went on. But I was so desperate to believe in the life I had built that I explained away every red flag, smoothed over every rough edge, convinced myself that all marriages had challenges. Charlie, meanwhile, had been struggling. Her influencer career, which had shown early promise, had plateaued. She was trapped in that difficult middle ground where she had too many followers to get a normal job without feeling like a failure, but not enough to actually make a sustainable living. She had been through a string of relationships, each one ending dramatically, each breakup somehow never her fault. At 30, she moved back in with our parents after her latest boyfriend threw her out of his flat, and I remember the shame in her eyes when she told me, the vulnerability beneath her usual bravado. I wanted to help her. That was always my instinct, to help, to fix, to make things better for the people I loved. So when she mentioned that she was thinking about getting into property, maybe flipping houses like she'd seen on those TV shows, I suggested she talk to Danny. He could give her advice, maybe point her toward some opportunities. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Danny was happy to help, or so I thought. He started meeting Charlie for coffee to discuss business strategies. He took her to view a few properties, explaining the market, teaching her to spot potential. I was pleased that they were getting along so well, that my husband was being so generous with his time and expertise for my sister's benefit. The meetings became more frequent. Danny would mention casually that he and Charlie had grabbed lunch while looking at a building in Liverpool, or that she had come to his office to go over some paperwork. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? She was my sister. He was my husband. The possibility of anything inappropriate never even entered my mind. That blindness lasted for over a year. The first hint that something was wrong came not from any dramatic discovery, but from my own body. I couldn't sleep properly. I would lie awake at 3 a.m, my heart racing, my mind churning with anxieties I couldn't quite name. I lost my appetite, dropped nearly a stone without trying. My doctor ran tests and found nothing wrong, suggested stress, prescribed sleeping tablets that left me groggy and dull. But it wasn't just stress, it was instinct. My subconscious processing information that my conscious mind refused to see. The way Danny's phone had become password protected after years of openness. The way he angled the screen away from me when texting. The new cologne he had started wearing. Something Charlie had complimented once at a family dinner. The fact that my sister, who had always been somewhat dismissive of Danny, unable to hide her opinion that I could have done better, had suddenly become his biggest champion. Little things, meaningless things, things that meant everything. I started paying closer attention, and once I began looking, I couldn't stop seeing. The way they leaned toward each other at family gatherings, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, the times Danny said he was working late when Charlie posted Instagram stories from restaurants nearby, the matching fitness watches they both started wearing, which they claimed was a coincidence. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was jealous and petty and should be ashamed of suspecting my own sister. I told myself that if I just loved harder, trusted more, was a better wife and sister, these ugly suspicions would fade away. Then I received that photograph. When the initial shock subsided, when I stopped shaking enough to think clearly, my first instinct was to confront them immediately, to scream and cry and demand explanations, to watch them grovel and beg for forgiveness. That's what most people would do, and that's what they were probably expecting, if they ever got caught. But something stopped me. Maybe it was my training as an accountant, my habit of gathering all the data before drawing conclusions. Maybe it was some deeper wisdom I didn't know I possessed. Or maybe it was simply the cold, clarifying rage that had begun to crystallize in my chest, sharp and precise as a diamond. If I confronted them now, I would be the hysterical wife. They would have time to coordinate their stories, to hide evidence, to spin the narrative in their favor. Charlie would cry and claim it was a moment of weakness, that she was so lost and confused after her failed career and relationships, that Danny had taken advantage of her vulnerability. Danny would swear it meant nothing, that he loved me, that he would do anything to make it right. And my parents would believe them because they always believed Charlie, and I would be expected to forgive for the sake of the family. No, I was done being reliable Rebecca, done being the one who smoothed things over and swallowed her pain and kept the peace at any cost. If they wanted to play games, I would play games, but I would play to win. The first thing I did was respond to the anonymous message with a simple thank you. Then I asked who had sent it. The reply came within minutes, a woman named Victoria, who said she worked at a hotel in Manchester, that she had been having an affair with Danny for the past 6 months, and that she had recently discovered she wasn't the only other woman in his life. She was angry, she said. She wanted him to face consequences, and she had a lot of information to share if I was interested. I was very interested. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop far from anywhere Danny might go. Victoria was younger than me, late 20s, pretty in a tired sort of way. She worked as a receptionist at a boutique hotel where Danny frequently stayed during his supposed business trips. Their affair had started when he offered to help her get into property, the same line he had apparently used on Charlie. She had believed his promises about leaving his wife, about building a future together. Then she found evidence of his relationship with my sister and realized she was just one of many. The things she told me made my stomach turn. The lies, the manipulation, the way Danny expertly made each woman feel special while playing them all against each other. But she also gave me something far more valuable than the satisfaction of shared outrage. She gave me evidence. Over the following weeks, Victoria became my unexpected ally. She had access to hotel records showing Danny's comings and goings, including many visits with Charlie. She had screenshots of messages he had sent her, full of promises and lies. And she had overheard things, conversations Danny had when he thought he was alone, phone calls where he discussed business matters that didn't quite add up. That last part was what really caught my attention. Because while the affair was devastating, the financial irregularities Victoria described sounded potentially criminal. I threw myself into investigation with the same methodical thoroughness I applied to my professional work. As a senior financial analyst, I had access to tools and knowledge that most people didn't. I knew how to trace money, how to spot discrepancies, how to follow the trail of numbers to their inevitable conclusions. Danny thought I had no interest in his business, and I had always let him believe that. But now I began quietly examining everything I could access. Joint bank statements, credit card records. the files he kept in his home office, which I photographed when he was away. The more I looked, the more I found. Danny's property development company was not as successful as he claimed. In fact, it was hemorrhaging money, kept afloat only by increasingly desperate measures. He had been borrowing against properties he didn't fully own. He had investors who believed they were buying into legitimate developments, but whose money was being used to cover debts from previous projects. It wasn't quite a Ponzi scheme, but it was close. And there was more. Danny had been hiding assets from our marriage, moving money into accounts I knew nothing about. Some of these accounts appeared to be connected to Charlie, though I couldn't yet prove exactly how. He had also taken out substantial loans, using our family home as collateral, loans I had never agreed to, and whose documents bore what I was increasingly certain was a forged version of my signature. Each discovery added to the picture, a portrait of a man I had never really known, hiding behind the charm and the smile and the carefully maintained facade. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a fraud. And my sister, whether she knew the full extent of his schemes or not, was at minimum benefiting from them. But I needed more. I needed ironclad proof, the kind that would hold up in court, the kind that would leave them no room to maneuver or explain away. So I kept gathering, kept documenting, kept playing the role of the oblivious wife while my file of evidence grew thicker by the day. The hardest part was maintaining the pretense at home. Every time Danny kissed my cheek before leaving for work, every time he told me he loved me, every time we sat down for dinner together like a normal couple, I had to swallow down the rage and revulsion and smile like nothing was wrong. Some nights, after he fell asleep, I would go to the bathroom and cry silently, gripping the edge of the sink, wondering if I was strong enough to see this through. But then I would remember the photograph. I would remember Victoria's face as she described being discarded when she became inconvenient. I would remember every time my sister had smiled at me while hiding her betrayal, and my resolve would harden again. 4 months into my investigation, I made a discovery that changed everything. I had been going through some old paperwork in Danny's office when I found a folder tucked behind others in a locked drawer, a drawer whose key I had discreetly copied weeks earlier. Inside were documents related to a property development in Sheffield, a project I had never heard Danny mention. The paperwork showed a substantial investment from a company I didn't recognize, money that had been used for purposes other than the stated development. It took me several days of research to trace the investing company back to its owner, a man named Marcus Webb. The name triggered something in my memory, and eventually I placed it. Marcus Webb had been in the news a few years ago, connected to various unsavory activities, though never successfully prosecuted. He was, according to the articles I found, widely suspected of money laundering through property investments. Danny wasn't just running a failing business propped up by questionable loans. He was potentially laundering money for criminals. I sat with that information for a long time, feeling the weight of it, understanding what it meant. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was serious criminal activity. If I reported it, Danny could go to prison. Part of me recoiled from that thought, from the idea of being responsible for destroying someone's life so completely, even someone who had hurt me so badly. But then I thought about what would happen if I didn't report it. These weren't victimless crimes. People lost money when businesses like Danny's collapsed. The money being laundered came from somewhere terrible, drugs or human trafficking or God knows what else. By staying silent to protect myself from the discomfort of consequences, I would be complicit. Besides, I had long since stopped caring about protecting Danny. I cared about protecting myself, about ensuring that when this all came out, I would be seen as the innocent victim, rather than the knowing accomplice. The only way to guarantee that was to be the one who exposed him. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed to understand Charlie's involvement first. I needed to know if my sister was a victim of Danny's manipulation, deceived just like I had been, or if she was an active participant in his schemes. The answer, when it came, broke my heart all over again. I got access to Charlie's email through a method I'm not proud of, using knowledge of her security questions from years of sisterly intimacy to reset her password when she was asleep during a family visit. What I found there removed any remaining doubt about her character. Email after email documented Charlie and Danny's affair in explicit detail. But they also revealed something worse. Charlie knew about the financial irregularities. She wasn't just Danny's mistress, she was his partner in crime. They had set up accounts together to hide money. She had helped him falsify documents. She had even, in one email that made me feel physically ill, discussed how to manage me, how to keep me compliant and unsuspecting while they continued their schemes. But the email that finally destroyed any lingering love I had for my sister was dated about 6 months before I received that anonymous photograph. In it, Charlie wrote to Danny about their long-term plan. Once they had accumulated enough hidden assets, once Danny's company had been milked for everything it was worth, they would arrange for me to discover the affair in a controlled way. Charlie would play the victim, claim Danny had coerced her, throw herself on our parents' mercy. Danny would beg my forgiveness, and I would probably forgive him, because that's what pathetic, desperate Rebecca always did. But if I didn't, they had a backup plan. The documents with my forged signature. The evidence they could plant to make it look like I was involved in the fraud. If I tried to fight back, they would take me down with them. They had been planning to destroy me from the beginning. The affair wasn't a mistake, a moment of weakness, a complicated situation. It was deliberate, calculated, and part of a scheme to use me, exploit me, and then discard me. I closed the laptop and sat in darkness for a long time. The hurt went so deep, I couldn't even cry. All those years of loving my sister despite everything, of defending her to friends who saw through her, of believing that beneath the selfishness and narcissism, there was a good person who loved me too. It had all been nothing. I was nothing to her, just an obstacle to be managed, a resource to be exploited. When the numbness finally faded enough for me to think clearly, I realized something important. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, gullible, too conditioned by a lifetime of people-pleasing to ever fight back. They thought I would react emotionally, make mistakes, play into their hands. They had no idea who they were dealing with. It was time to stop gathering information and start taking action. The first phase of my plan involved preparing for divorce in a way that would leave Danny with as little as possible. I quietly consulted with a solicitor who specialized in complex financial divorces, someone recommended by a colleague who had been through a messy split with a businessman. I presented her with a summary of what I had found, being careful not to reveal everything yet, and asked how best to protect my interests. Her advice was clear: document everything. Secure copies of all financial records I could access. Start separating my own finances from Danny's as much as possible without raising suspicion. And most importantly, be prepared for him to try to hide assets once divorce proceedings began. I had already done most of this, but her guidance helped me refine my approach. I opened new accounts in my name only, gradually moved money that was clearly mine, my salary, inheritances, personal savings, into protected spaces. I made copies of every document I could find and stored them in multiple locations, with my solicitor, with a trusted friend, in a safe deposit box. I also made one other crucial preparation. I contacted the National Crime Agency. This was the hardest decision I had ever made. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the fraud and the deliberate cruelty, Danny was still my husband. We had shared a bed for 7 years. We had talked about having children together. Some part of me, however small and damaged, still remembered loving him. But I thought about Marcus Webb and the source of his money. I thought about the investors Danny had defrauded, ordinary people looking to grow their savings who had trusted him with their futures. I thought about the fact that if I stayed silent and his schemes eventually collapsed on their own, I might be implicated simply by association. And I thought about justice. Real justice, not just the satisfaction of a messy divorce, but genuine accountability for genuine crimes. The NCA were very interested in what I had to tell them. I spent several hours in a nondescript office explaining what I had discovered, showing them documents, answering questions. They couldn't tell me much about their investigation, but I could read between the lines. Danny wasn't the only person they were building a case against. Marcus Webb was a bigger fish, and Danny was potentially a route to catch him. They asked me to continue as I had been, to keep gathering information, to maintain my cover as the unsuspecting wife. It was dangerous, they acknowledged, but it would help them build a stronger case. They would be watching, they promised. They would protect me. I agreed, because by that point, I was committed. There was no going back, only forward, toward whatever awaited. The second phase of my plan focused on Charlie. My sister's entire life was built on image. Her social media presence, her influencer aspirations, her carefully curated appearance of success and happiness. She had built a following of nearly 200,000 people who believed in the fantasy she projected. The gorgeous young woman with the perfect style and the inspiring quotes and the seemingly blessed existence. They had no idea that behind the facade was a woman willing to betray her own sister, to participate in financial fraud, to plot the destruction of someone who had only ever tried to help her. I was going to show them, but not yet. Timing was everything. I needed to wait until the moment when exposure would cause maximum damage, when Charlie had nowhere to hide and no one willing to help her. In the meantime, I began quietly documenting her involvement in Danny's schemes. I found records of payments made to her that had no legitimate explanation. I traced assets that had been hidden in her name. I saved every email, every message, every piece of evidence that showed she wasn't an innocent bystander, but an active conspirator. I also started reaching out very carefully to people from Charlie's past. Former friends she had discarded when they were no longer useful. Ex-boyfriends she had treated badly. Business contacts she had burned. It was remarkable how many people were willing to share stories once they understood someone was finally listening. A picture emerged of a woman who had spent her entire life manipulating those around her. The charm I had always admired was a weapon she deployed strategically. The vulnerability she showed was a performance to elicit sympathy and resources. Even our parents, whom she supposedly adored, were primarily useful to her as a source of financial support and unconditional validation. Learning these things should have hurt, but by that point I was beyond hurt. I was operating on a different level, cold and focused and patient. Every story, every piece of evidence, every confirmation of my sister's true nature just added fuel to the fire I was carefully, methodically building. 6 months after I received that first photograph, everything was in place. The NCA had enough to move forward with their investigation. My solicitor had prepared divorce papers that would blindside Danny with the extent of my knowledge. I had a folder of evidence about Charlie's true character, ready to share with the world at the right moment. All I needed was a trigger, an event that would set everything in motion. I got one in the most unexpected way. Charlie announced she was pregnant. She told the family at our parents' house on a Sunday afternoon, beaming as she showed off the ultrasound picture. Danny, my husband, standing beside her with his hand on her still flat stomach. Our mother crying with joy. Our father opening champagne. Everyone celebrating this wonderful news while I sat frozen in my chair, feeling like I was watching a play performed in a language I didn't speak. Danny hadn't even told me he was leaving, hadn't filed for divorce, hadn't done any of the things a normal person would do before publicly announcing they had impregnated their wife's sister. He just stood there, his hand on Charlie, and told my family that he and Charlie had fallen in love, that these things happen, that he hoped I would find it in my heart to be happy for them someday. Charlie cried prettily and said she never meant to hurt me, that she had tried to fight her feelings but they were just too strong, that she hoped we could still be sisters when I had time to process everything. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to object, to express outrage on my behalf, to do anything other than accept this betrayal with wine and congratulations. Instead, my mother told me gently that maybe this was for the best, that Danny and I hadn't been happy for a while, had we, that I was still young, I could find someone else, and wouldn't it be lovely to be an aunt? My father said nothing at all. He never had when it came to Charlie. I could have exploded then, could have revealed everything I knew, watched their faces change as they understood what their precious younger daughter was really like. But I thought about timing, about maximum impact, about the careful plan I had spent months building. So I smiled. I said I needed some time to process. I congratulated them quietly and left early, driving home through blurred vision as tears finally broke through my carefully maintained control. But by the time I reached my house, the tears had dried. In their place was a cold, crystalline certainty. They had just made my job so much easier. I filed for divorce the next morning, citing adultery and unreasonable behavior. The papers included a detailed financial disclosure request and a freeze on all joint assets pending investigation. Danny received them at his office, and I know from later accounts that his face went white when he realized how much I knew. He called me immediately, his voice shaking between anger and fear. How did I know? Who told me? This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. We needed to talk, to work this out, to handle this properly. I let him talk, let him dig himself deeper, let him reveal his panic. Then I told him calmly that any further communication should go through my solicitor, and I hung up. The next few weeks were chaos. Danny tried everything to regain control of the situation. He called constantly, left pleading voicemails, showed up at my office until security escorted him out. He tried to access accounts we had frozen and discovered his options were severely limited. He reached out to mutual friends with his version of events, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive wife who couldn't accept that he had fallen in love with someone else. Some people believed him. Many didn't. The story of a man leaving his wife for her sister while she was pregnant was too salacious to spin as anything other than betrayal, regardless of his explanations. Charlie, meanwhile, went into full victim mode. Her social media filled with cryptic posts about being judged, about love being complicated, about the cruelty of people who couldn't understand. She gave an interview to a gossip site where she cried about how she never meant to hurt anyone, how she and Danny had fought their feelings for so long, how she hoped her sister would forgive her someday. The interview included a very flattering photo of Charlie showing off her small bump, and the comments section was full of people calling her brave and beautiful, and expressing hope that everything would work out. I saved that interview. I would need it later. 3 weeks after I filed for divorce, the police arrested Danny. It happened at 7 in the morning, uniformed officers at our former family home, now his residence alone since I had moved to a rented flat. He was taken in for questioning about financial irregularities, fraud, and suspected money laundering. The arrest was reported in the local news, then picked up by national papers once the connection to Marcus Webb became known. Danny's business collapsed within days. Investors who had believed his promises suddenly wanted their money back. Partners distanced themselves. Properties that were supposed to be developed sat abandoned. The carefully constructed facade of success crumbled so fast, it was almost dizzying. I watched it happen from a distance, feeling very little except tired satisfaction. This was justice, real and tangible and public. Whatever happened in our divorce proceedings, whatever attempts Danny made to hide assets or blame me for his failures, he would never recover from this. But I wasn't finished yet. I had barely started. The first major revelation came from my solicitor. During the divorce discovery process, we had requested full financial disclosure from Danny. What we received was woefully incomplete, as expected. But it did confirm several of my suspicions. More importantly, the gaps in his disclosure gave us grounds to request a more thorough investigation. That investigation revealed the extent of assets hidden in Charlie's name, properties she supposedly owned that had been purchased with money diverted from Danny's business, accounts holding funds that couldn't be explained by her modest influencer income, a paper trail that connected both of them to schemes that went far beyond a simple affair. My solicitor was delighted. The judge was not impressed with Danny's attempts at concealment. The divorce settlement, when it was finally calculated, was far more favorable to me than anyone had expected. But the money, significant though it was, wasn't the point. The point was exposure. The point was making sure everyone understood exactly who Danny and Charlie really were. The second revelation came from Victoria, my unexpected ally from the beginning. She had been cooperating with the police investigation, providing testimony about what she had witnessed during her affair with Danny. In return, she received assurance that she wouldn't face charges for her unknowing peripheral involvement in some of his schemes. Victoria's testimony painted a vivid picture of Danny's double life. The lies, the manipulation, the way he made each woman feel special while playing them all. It also revealed something I hadn't known. Danny had been planning to leave the country. He had been making arrangements to move assets abroad, to establish a new life somewhere without extradition treaties. Charlie was supposed to join him once the baby was born. They were going to run, leave behind the mess they had created, the people they had hurt, the debts they couldn't pay, and start fresh somewhere sunny with no consequences. The discovery of these escape plans did not help Danny's legal situation. Flight risk was added to the list of concerns, and his bail conditions became significantly more restrictive. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of the constant tension, the endless revelations, the slow grinding work of justice. There were moments when I wanted it to be over, wanted to walk away and start rebuilding my life without constantly picking at this wound. But I couldn't stop yet. Not until Charlie faced her own reckoning. My sister had managed to escape most of the fallout so far. She wasn't charged with anything, probably because she had been careful to maintain plausible deniability about the worst of Danny's schemes. She had distanced herself publicly from him once the arrests happened, issuing a statement through her social media about being deceived and manipulated by a man she had trusted. The pregnancy complicated things. Public sympathy tends to favor pregnant women, especially beautiful ones who cry prettily on camera. Charlie positioned herself as another of Danny's victims, an innocent woman who had made mistakes because she believed his lies about leaving his wife, who was now facing single motherhood because the man she loved turned out to be a criminal. It was a masterful performance. I almost admired it. But I had her emails. I had evidence of her knowing participation in Danny's schemes. I had documentation of assets hidden in her name. And I had something else now, something I had been cultivating carefully over the months of investigation. I had her secrets. Charlie's carefully curated image of success and authenticity was built on lies. The luxury flat she showcased on social media, Danny had been paying for it. The designer clothes and accessories, funded by money that ultimately came from fraud. The wellness products she endorsed, some of them were borderline dangerous, and she knew it. There were emails where she discussed concerns about safety, but decided the sponsorship money was worth the risk. Beyond the material deceptions, there were personal ones. Charlie had been engaged twice before Danny, relationships I had heard about, but both engagements had ended in ways she had never fully explained. Now I had the full stories. One fiancé had caught her cheating and she had threatened to claim he had been abusive unless he left quietly. The other had discovered she had been running up massive debts in his name and only escaped financial ruin by paying her off to go away. These weren't rumors or suppositions. I had documentation, testimony from the men involved, records that showed a pattern of manipulation going back years. And I had the emails between her and Danny, the ones where she discussed how to handle me, how to keep me compliant, how to destroy my reputation if I ever tried to fight back. My sister had spent her entire life treating people as resources to be exploited. She had learned early that her charm and beauty gave her power, and she had used that power ruthlessly, leaving a trail of damaged people in her wake. Our parents' indulgence had taught her that she would never face real consequences, that there would always be someone to clean up her messes, that being pretty and crying at the right moment would get her out of anything. It was time for her to learn differently. I chose my moment carefully. Charlie had been rebuilding her public image in the months since Danny's arrest, positioning herself as a survivor, as a woman who had overcome betrayal and was bravely facing single motherhood. Her follower count had actually increased, buoyed by sympathetic coverage and her own skillful manipulation of the narrative. She announced a book deal, a memoir about love, betrayal, and finding strength after heartbreak. The advance was reportedly substantial, Publishers loved a compelling personal story, and Charlie's tale of being deceived by a charming criminal while pregnant had all the elements of a bestseller. The timing was perfect. I reached out to a journalist I had identified through careful research, someone with a reputation for thorough investigation and a particular interest in exposing influencer fraud. We met for coffee, and I presented her with everything I had. The resulting article was devastating. It revealed that Charlie had known about Danny's criminal activities from early in their relationship and had actively participated in hiding assets. It exposed her previous patterns of manipulation, including testimony from both ex-fiancés willing to go on record. It documented the fraudulent nature of her lifestyle, the undisclosed payments, the deceptive practices, the dangerous products promoted to vulnerable followers, and it quoted extensively from her emails with Danny, including the passages where she discussed destroying my reputation. The article went viral within hours. Other outlets picked up the story. Former friends and acquaintances came forward with their own accounts of being used and discarded. Followers who had believed in her felt betrayed and said so loudly. The book deal evaporated. Sponsors pulled their partnerships. Her social media accounts were flooded with accusations and demands for accountability. Charlie tried to respond, posting a tearful video denying everything, claiming she was being framed, begging her supporters to stand by her. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too thoroughly documented, too impossible to explain away. For the first time in her life, my sister's tears didn't work. The aftermath was everything I had hoped for, and nothing like I expected. Danny was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering. He received a sentence of 7 years, of which he would likely serve around 4. His assets were seized, the investors recovered some portion of their losses, and Marcus Webb, the bigger fish, was also brought down by the trail of evidence that Danny's case exposed. Charlie faced charges for her involvement in hiding assets. The prosecution was less severe than Danny's, resulting in a suspended sentence and substantial community service, but the court proceedings exposed further details of her schemes that destroyed whatever remained of her public image. She lost everything: the followers, the endorsements, the lifestyle, the respect. She moved back in with our parents, heavily pregnant and utterly humiliated. My parents tried to broker peace. They couldn't understand, they said, why I had done this to my own sister. Yes, she had made mistakes, but did she deserve to be destroyed? Was I happy now that I had ruined her life? I told them calmly that Charlie had made choices, that those choices had consequences, and that I refused to pretend otherwise. I told them that they had spent our entire lives enabling her worst behavior, and that if they couldn't see why that was wrong, I didn't know how to explain it to them. We haven't spoken since. That part hurts, if I'm honest. Losing my parents wasn't part of the plan. I had hoped that when they saw the full truth, they would finally understand, would finally choose me, would finally acknowledge that their lifelong favoritism had helped create the monster their younger daughter became. But that's not how it worked out. They saw Charlie as the victim and me as the aggressor, and I don't think anything will ever change their minds. I've had to accept that. I've had to grieve the family I thought I had, the parents I wished they had been, the sister I desperately wanted to love and be loved by. It's hard. Some days it still feels impossible, but I'm also free. Free from the constant second-guessing, the people-pleasing, the desperate need for approval that defined most of my life. Free from a marriage built on lies and a relationship with my sister that was never what I believed it to be. Free to build a new life on my own terms, surrounded by people who see me clearly and choose me anyway. The divorce settlement gave me a significant sum, enough to buy a small flat in Manchester and have plenty left over. I've advanced in my career, partly because the experience gave me confidence I never had before. I've made new friends, real friends who value honesty and reciprocity. I've started therapy, working through years of conditioning and trauma, learning to recognize my own worth without needing external validation. I've even started dating again, carefully and slowly. There's someone, a colleague who transferred from our London office, who makes me laugh and seems genuinely interested in who I am, rather than what I can provide. It's early days, and I'm cautious in ways I never was before, but it feels hopeful in a way I didn't expect to feel again. Charlie had her baby, a girl she named Aurora. I've never met my niece and probably never will. Sometimes that thought makes me sad, but mostly I try not to think about it. There's no way to have a relationship with that child without engaging with Charlie, and I'm not willing to do that. Last I heard, Charlie was trying to rebuild her online presence, rebranding herself as someone who made mistakes and learned from them, selling redemption as her new product. Some people seem to be buying it. Others remember what she did and remind everyone loudly whenever she posts. I don't follow her accounts, but friends occasionally forward things to me, and I can see the effort she's putting into reconstructing her image. I don't know if she's actually changed or if this is just another performance. I don't really care anymore. She exists in my past, a lesson learned, a wound that scarred over, and occasionally aches in certain weather. But she doesn't have power over me anymore. She's just someone I used to know. Danny will be released in a couple of years, maybe less with good behavior. I try not to think about that either. He'll emerge into a world where his reputation is destroyed, his professional network dissolved, his options severely limited. Whatever future he builds will be small and constrained. Nothing like the life he imagined for himself. I know revenge isn't supposed to make you happy. All the wisdom says that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And there's truth in that. If I had spent these years consumed by bitterness, focused only on making them pay, I would have destroyed myself in the process. But what I did wasn't about anger. It was about justice. It was about refusing to let people who deliberately hurt me walk away without consequences. It was about standing up for myself in a way I never had before, taking control of a narrative that they had tried to spin in their favor. And yes, there was satisfaction in watching them fall. I won't pretend otherwise. After everything they did, after the calculated cruelty, and the deliberate betrayal, and the schemes to destroy my reputation, if I fought back, seeing them face real consequences felt like vindication. But the real victory wasn't their downfall. It was my own transformation. The woman who stood frozen in her kitchen, staring at that photograph with her heart shattering into pieces, she's gone now. In her place is someone stronger, someone who knows her own worth, someone who will never again sacrifice her well-being for people who don't deserve her loyalty. I think about her sometimes, that earlier version of me. I have compassion for her, for the way she was trained from childhood to minimize her own needs, to find her value in being useful to others, to accept crumbs of affection and convince herself they were feasts. She did the best she could with what she had, but I'm glad she evolved. I'm glad the crucible of betrayal forged something harder and clearer. I'm glad I found the courage to fight back. If you're listening to this and you're in a situation like mine, if someone close to you has betrayed your trust and you're wondering whether to accept it or fight back, I have one piece of advice. Don't react immediately. Don't let emotion drive your choices. Take time to gather information, to understand the full picture, to prepare your response carefully. The people who hurt you are counting on you to be emotional, to make mistakes, to play into their hands. Surprise them. Be strategic. Be patient. Be ruthless only when necessary, but don't be afraid to be ruthless. And remember that you deserve better. Whatever they made you believe, whatever lies they told, whatever role you were assigned in their story, you have the right to rewrite the ending. You have the right to walk away from people who hurt you. You have the right to demand consequences for those who deliberately cause harm. It took me 34 years to learn that. I hope it doesn't take you as long. My name is Rebecca Hartwell. My husband and sister tried to destroy me, and I took everything they were hiding. This is my story, but the ending is the beginning, because the best part of my life is still being written. And this time I'm holding the pen.